What are the main issues that are helping to decide your vote this election? Starting with you, Sarah.
The main issues that are helping decide my vote would be women's safety, childcare, NDIS, which I know isn't just a women's issue, but it's a big one for me, the gender pay gap as well. So they're the key issues.
What about you, Alpha?
I think that, having lived in Greater Western Sydney for, most of my life, and listening also to what, concerns communities on the ground, the cost of living will be a key issue. And yes, I agree, NDIS, but also the aged care reforms, as well as underemployment. There are quite a few issues that are taking us to this election, as well as migration and especially family reunion.
You mentioned women's safety, Sarah, and that's been a big discussion, particularly over the last 5 years or so. Women's safety on the streets, women's safety at home, women's safety at work, even in Parliament. Do you feel as though the political leaders are treating that with the right amount of urgency?
To be honest, I don't think they are, and I think the last 5 years has shown us that with the Brittany Higgins and certain individuals that have come out and that haven't been heard, or when they have come out, we've read these horror stories and they've been, reprimanded for that. So I don't think that women are being heard in Parliament, and these issues are being addressed adequately.
What about you, Alpha? Do you feel as though you're satisfied with what's being presented by the major parties?
I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think that we need to pay a little bit more attention when it comes to diversity of different diverse groups. And if I may use the example of migrant and refugee women, they're two very different groups of women that need a very specific approach. Refugee women, for example, might be impacted by trauma, by genital mutilation, so we can't treat them exactly the same as, the migrant women. I think that government needs to seriously consider additional funding for culturally specific specialist domestic violence services. And I also believe that as a country, we need to start looking at more early intervention programs. We seem that, we always chase to find solutions to the problems rather than investing more in early intervention.
I completely agree with that. There's so much work that needs to be done, and particularly in those areas and those minority groups that we see. The data suggests that there's higher representation of DV, of a whole range of things. And I was saddened to hear that 1 in 3 phone calls from crisis centres goes unanswered for victims of DV, and I just think that is huge. If you're in a place where you need specialist health care, any sort of care, 1 in 3 phone calls doesn't get answered. So I don't think there has been adequate budget put towards a range of these issues, and I think we can see that. And we saw a spike in DV cases, up 26% in the pandemic. So I really hope that we can see more funding put towards this, and specialist housing, so that we can get women into housing quickly.
Yes.
Affordable housing, a whole range of things, but I don't think there has been adequate supports, and particularly for those minority groups as well.
Childcare is an issue that impacts both men and women, but so often it's the case that women decide how they work or when they work or whether they work based on the childcare responsibilities and the cost of childcare. When you look at what's being presented and what's being offered by both the major parties, is that enough on childcare?
Personally for me, I'd love childcare to be completely accessible for everyone and paid for, truly, because I think the fact that women are having to make decisions about whether they can work, whether it is worth their while to work or not, and some women that are working are coming out of pocket, are not making any money, and then can't progress in their careers, and a whole range of issues. Just this week my son's childcare was closed because one of the workers' kids had COVID, and we had to have that discussion of who's going to stay at home, and it was me, because just looking at figures. And I just think it's hard for women to progress in careers if childcare can't be more affordable and accessible for everyone.
Yeah. What about you, Elfa?
Yes, I think it is a black and white issue. It took us a lot of years to advocate for flexible working arrangements. It took COVID to make everything flexible. And make things even harder for women that were staying home and working during COVID, because they had to look after their household, they had to look after their children. So, I totally agree. Childcare needs a whole review. The subsidies need to be reviewed. Otherwise, we can't talk about women's economic participation in the workforce.
This election, there are more female independent candidates that are really gaining some traction. And whether this applies individually to your seats or not, has their presence impacted the way that you have engaged, Sarah?
Yeah, I think in my area, absolutely. It's been fantastic to see things being mixed up, and our Representative Sophie Scumps, and I think the community has really rallied behind her, because her issues seem to really resonate with all of us, with the majority of us, and particularly young people. I think, and a huge one is climate change, which is absolutely massive. I didn't mention that at the start, but climate change, integrity in politics, the gender issues she's come forward on. So a whole range of issues. I think it's fantastic to mix it up. We've been a Liberal seat for so long. I really hope that she gets in, and to see what change that we can see, and what differences that we can see to help the community.
One message from Scott Morrison was that, with everything that's going on with natural disasters like fires and floods, with the pandemic and with war, that now is not the time to change, that it's too risky to change now. Do you agree, Sarah?
I think it's risky if we don't change. Just personally, on those issues of the bushfires, I don't think that how they were handled, and floods and climate change and a whole range of things. I'd love to see things being mixed up, and us really working for a better future for our kids. So I think it is the time to change, personally, and I hope that we do.
Do you agree, Elfa? What do you feel?
I think that the pandemic has reshaped our society and politics altogether. All the challenges that we've been through these last few years have allowed all political parties and all levels of government, for that matter, to listen carefully to the concerns and the issues of communities on the grounds, from the cities to Greater Western Sydney to regional areas. So for the ones that have open, minds and are listening, I think that it is important, and they do understand that change is imminent. If we really, thinking and are authentically, genuinely enough caring about our human beings, our fellow human beings. So, yeah.
Elfa and Sarah, thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.